my name's Phil and this is my bike. It's a Norton framed BSA, fondly known locally as Frank's NorBSA. He built it many years ago, kept it in his shed a long time, sold it once, bought it back again, rebuilt it again, then decided to sell it on. A friend of mine told me it was for sale, so we made a purchase. Always wanted a cafe racer. Unlike a production bike, this has been built in the shed. The frame, as you can see, is a Norton Featherbed with a bolt-on subframe, and the engine's out of a BSA Rocket 3. Frame and the pipes all fit nicely. It's had a Norville front forks put on it, same as on a Commando, with a disc brake. The tank we have made in a firm from Wales, and the seat we bought from Dave Degens, funnily enough, who still trades up in Surrey. Shock absorbers are Hagen's, new silencers, a little bit noisier than the originals that were on it. Had all the carburetors cleaned and replaced by our friend Dave, who we'll speak to you in a minute. Various changes that we made is put a gel battery on it, which sits under the seat nice and neatly. The original parts that Frank made was the oil tank, which he made out of stainless. The engine mountings were all made homemade. The clock brackets were all made all out of stainless steel, nicely done. And when we put it all back together, we had the clocks refurbed by a guy. They're as new. New tyres, all the chrome polished up, everything done nicely. And it's made it a very nice rideable bike. You have to ride this, you fight it round corners at speed, and you've got to give it a good 100-yard start before you pull the brakes, because it just doesn't stop. But it's nice to ride, it puts you in the feeling of the old days. Something I always wanted when I was a 16-year-old but couldn't afford. Now we're old, can hardly ride it because of the arthritis, but it's nice to look at and sits in the shed pride of place. It's very much the racer position. Clip-ons, you're bent right down, your wrists hurt after a half an hour, your back hurts because you've got your bucket seat. It's not the easiest to operate the levers on because they're all put together tight to give you this feeling of going fast when you're not. It makes a lovely noise. When you go through a town and that, people will look up and you can see they know what this is all about. This is old British motorcycling. I like it. It's not for sale. It's something I will keep and ride it when I can until I can't ride it anymore. Fors and against for holding a classic bike. Well, they are very nice to ride. Everyone stops and has a look when you park up at a cafe or a pub. Downsides are they're right to start. You need to lock them away with chains and covers and not let anyone know where they live, otherwise someone will steal it. Everything on an old bike is sort of hand in your mouth type job because they are difficult to start and they don't stop. You have to clean it regularly, you have to maintain it, you have to check that it's, no fuel leaks, no oil leaks. British bikes renowned to have oil leaks. No oil leaks, put together properly. Anyone can throw something together and then moan that it leaks oil, but unless you do the job properly, it will leak. Same with the fuel. If you keep fresh fuel in it, don't ride it once a year and then say it don't start, because you need to put fresh fuel in it. Clean it out nice, take the tank off and wash it out occasionally if it's not going to be used very often. Better to look at it than ride it, I think. That's why I've got it. Ride, do the tours on, buy a modern bike. To look at, take to a show, talk about it, buy yourself a classic bike. Well, when I got the bike, it hadn't been ridden very much at all. And a friend of mine, Dave, he got to come and had a look at it for me and suggested we have a bit of a tidy up. There's a few parts on it that weren't nice to look at. The tank and the seat were fiberglass. Basically, he wanted pulling to bits, tidying up, new parts that were needed, fresh oil, carburetors stripped and cleaned. And Dave's the man to do that because that's what he does.
The bike was in a bit of a state where it was like 70s, 80s built, early 80s probably. Basically what we've done with this bike, we took it right down to just engine and frame and rebuilt it from there. Front mudguard was a full length. What we decided to do, just chop it down. It's quite nice actually because it gives it a more sporty appearance. Forks are Commando, Norton Commando. They work very well. Norton forks road holders in the past have been extremely good forks. So if you're going to do a build, Commando road holders on Dominators, good front end to use. The brake disc assembly, it is a Commando, but it is the big brake conversion. they've done this, it's slightly bigger, so it should be a more efficient brake, but it's still, you know, it could be better. The back wheel, that's all commando. Obviously at the time when this bike was built, those parts are quite plentiful, but that's a good brake. It works very well. It's easy to put in there. They do have conical hubs sometimes. If you was to look at the bike when it had the Manx Norton engine in, when they raced it, you have conical hubs, and to build a bike up with conical hubs is so expensive. So this really works very well. As far as the engine goes, it had to have new carburetors because with age, these carbs, once they get furred up inside, you can't really clean them out. We tried using a sonic cleaner, couldn't get the carburation right, so we required 3 new carburetors, which are a later type of concentric, and everything will come apart in those carbs if necessary. Got it to run a lot better. It's got a nice tick over to it now. We decided to put the hump seat, so it's got the Manx seat, and we decided to tidy up the electrics. So all the electrics underneath the hump, under the seat, whereas normally when you build these sort of bikes, and this was in the state where the battery would have been on the swing arm. So we've put the battery in a tray underneath the hump, because it's a small battery. So we have electronic ignition, and that's hidden away as well. We have a tag out the back for Optimate, so you can charge a battery as you need to. The clutch in these, as everyone knows, is the diaphragm clutch. It's either in or it's out. It's quite positive, and that can be a little bit of a handful at times. This is the original seat that was on the bike. Typical 70s sort of style, where it's all fiberglass. It has the compartment in the back where you'd have a few tools. But to be honest with you, because it has the number plate on the back here, it doesn't really look right on that bike now, because people like that Manx style. It looks cleaner. So we've done away with this seat. The fuel tank, as everyone knows, fiberglass, it can delaminate. It's caused by ethanol and fuel. And what happens is it starts breaking down, it goes scabby, the petrol will become, literally the tank will become porous. It will leak through from the inside to the outside. I had this on a race bike, this same situation. So we decided to put a nice aluminium tank, as you've seen in the video. So that really is redundant. As you can see here, we have the old silencers, they're megaphones. And because we lifted the appearance of the bike and made it look, you know, nice and shiny, these really wanted replacing. They just didn't look right. Black mudguard that was on the bike is not the right profile, and it's got so many holes in it. This actually would be a front mudguard. It's a wider mudguard now. What we have on the back here, this would be off something like a Dominator. This is a Norton part. It looks right. You're trying to make the lines look tidy. You don't want to over clutter it. And like the breather assembly, we just had a tail breather coming out by the side of the mudguard. I only wanted one breather pipe. We didn't want pipes hanging out all over the place. So it's got a clean line to it, really. Shocks, yeah, I've replaced those. The old ones, they lost their damping, and you know, Hagen shocks are very good, as people know. We did have a little bit of trouble though with the linkage. The rear set linkage is not an easy one, and because the kickstart's a long sweep, trying to get it to miss a gear lever was a little bit awkward. So we had to compromise a little bit. It's not easy. He finds with his foot, he's trouble getting his toe into it, but that's how you live with these bikes. You have to sort of like take a few of the bits that aren't so good and make the best of it, really.
Right, this is the best bit of all ride outs on classic bikes. You approach the bike, you've got mechanical things like the choke, which you have to push this way on this particular model. There's 2 fuel taps, because it's got 3 carburetors, one down one side and one the other side. As you can see, being a regular rider, I know exactly where it is. Then you do the famous tickling of the carburetors, of which there are 3. You do the outer one here until the fuel floods through. Do the other side till the fuel floods through, which hopefully it will. And you do the middle one, which is right to get on, unless you've got 3-foot-long fingers. And there, hopefully, we have it. Nice fire hazard. Put the footrest up, kickstart out, on board. Turn on the ignition, pull the clutch in, get it in your right position, and hopefully, with a bit of luck, it might go. On the other hand, it might not. on, there he is.
Phil's not decided what he wants to do with the tank because it should have a logo on there really. At the moment people just sort of think, well, it's got to be a Triton. It should be NorBSA. The tank on this, it's quite easy to mount because being a wide line frame, you've got 2 tubes running, one each side, and you can put rubber on there, mount the tank on to the rubber. That works quite well. This one has just a main strap over the top, which is a typical cafe racer style. You have a clip at the back, it just puts tension on there. That's made of stainless steel, rubber underneath it. It just pulls down nicely. And the oil tank has the Monza cap central. The frame on here, as we know, is an early wide line featherbed frame, which has the bolt up subframe. With this setup, with this engine, there's a lot of weight there in the front and a little bit of flex on the back end. So I put a horseshoe stiffener in the back, which would run between the shock on one side to the shock on the other side. It just stops this flexing, because the later frames, they've done away with this idea of bolting up the subframe. It's all welded. So it's a little bit prone to a little bit of, it can be a little bit twitchy, but I think that's helped it. That definitely makes a big improvement. There is a bit of a story about the wide line frames. Fantastic handling, and with the Norton 500 engine, it couldn't be beaten really. It was so good in its day, and for a while they were using the Norton engines in a race series in cars. So what was happening was people would want to buy the engines and not the bike, and I think Norton's got fed up with the fact that their engines were being bought and not the bikes. So they made these companies who were racing this series of car buy the whole bike, and then what was happening was they had to sell the frames off, and so builders were picking these up, and I think they were going quite cheap at the time, but I don't really know. But so it's very popular, very, very popular. So yeah, with this engine in this frame, said earlier, it makes it a really nice machine. A little bit heavy, being a triple, but the power you get and the sound you get, I think that's a small price to pay really. Getting back to the featherbed frame, the wide line frame was used by many engines other than standard. It would have been something like an ES2, a single cylinder 500 originally, or it could have been a Dominator, which would have been a 500 or 600 twin Norton engine. But people put all sorts of engines in here. Triumph, pre-unit, twin. It might be a 500, it might be a 650 pre-unit. Or later they would put in something like a T140 engine, or you know, anything really that would go in that frame, to be honest with you. It's such a good frame. The handling from a featherbed, need I tell anyone, they handle extremely well. So to get a triple engine to actually sit in that frame is not bad. It's quite tight, but it goes in there. If you're going to put an engine into a frame like this, obviously it wasn't designed to go in there, so your job is going to be quite involved. In the old days, you would probably get your frame, and you have your frame in the workshop on the bench, and you put a cardboard box underneath the frame, and you sit your engine on the top. You've got a start point. From there, you probably get bits of cardboard, and you draw out what you think would be your engine plates, and where you would think it would probably sit properly. The best position really. You don't want it too far back, too far forward. Obviously it's got to clear the frame. You want to make sure the engine sits as low as possible in the frame. You don't want this too high, it's a big old lump. So keep it all low, better centre of gravity really. The swing arm, which holds the back wheel, the alignment's got to be right. So when you build this, you've got to make sure that your chain run is straight. You don't want the sprockets being out of line, or the back wheel out of line, as it won't handle. It takes a bit of time to sort that out. You had straight edges, and you know, it all falls into place, but something you don't want to rush. It's so important to make sure the engine's mounted absolutely vertical. So when you do this, you know, you use the spirit level across the frame to make sure it's standing right, and across the engine you take reference points, and that's how you do it. You've got to get that spot on, then the rest of it will work. If you don't get that right first, it's never going to work out, and you'll take the bike up the road and it just won't handle. So it's so important to get the chain run. The engine's got to be mounted properly in the frame. And also making sure, obviously this has got commando forks, just to make sure when they're compressed that the wheel doesn't come up too far, hit the front of the frame. But all that should be fine because, you know, it's been done so many times. And same when you fit a tank in the seat unit, you've got to sit on the bike and know where you're going to be with comfort, and you've got to get your tank mounting right so it doesn't touch the handlebars when they're on the lock, so the headstock doesn't come around and crease the tank. So there's a lot of things to get right, and it's got to look right in the eye too. So you make your first engine mounting plates out of cardboard, and you play around with that to start with. When you've got that right, you probably make them out of plywood. And probably your engine at this stage probably wasn't even built up inside. It would just be a pair of cases, so you've got no weight to it. You probably hung on all the bits that would be fitting onto the mounts, so you could put it into the frame. So you can lift your engine around and you can get your plates right, your mock-up plates, which are made of plywood. When everything is right, you can bolt it up on plywood and get in the chain runs, the swing arm correct, and all that sorted out. Then you would manufacture your engine plates, rather than waste money and thinking you know what you want, and you've cut it all out and it's not the right size, and you know, so cardboard, then go to plywood, then make up your plates. That's how it would be done. But in these days, so many people, specialists now, will supply your engine plates that will fit that frame, so it cuts that out really. But it's quite fun doing it yourself. That's the sense of achievement really in building something from scratch.
If you enjoy our videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, click the notifications bell and give the video a like. We value every one of our subscribers, and your support really does help us make more videos. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see more of our videos that we think you'll like. Thank you for supporting the Classic Motorcycle channel.